Nice to see. Nice to see another year of Books and Beyond. Time has passed so fast, and we are already in our third year of doing these webinars. So it's amazing to see that the community wants even more. There's hunger for books, and we have so many authors to explore and so many minds to explore that it's always a pleasure to be here. So hopefully everybody had a great time in the end of 2023. You had rest, you spent precious time with your families, and are fully charged for a year full of surprises. And here in Books and Beyond, we have a great lineup for you this year again. And just because we are so liking our multicultural nature, we thought that how best to start the year, but with a webinar with experts from all around the world. So we have Ross Garland, who is currently in UK. It would be a good evening for you, Ross. And then we have Adrian Mori, who is in Australia. So it would be a good morning for you, Adrian. And both of them are graciously accepted to come here. Good morning, Adrian. And they will be talking, we'll have a very insightful discussion about project, program, and portfolio governance. Basically our 3 Ps that we face daily, most of us at least. And we are very happy to have you. And we hope that you will have fun and you will learn a lot from this conversation. So for the audience, go ahead and use the chat on your right side of your screen. As you know, tell us where you're coming from, tell us how you're feeling, tell us what you want us to talk more about, what time of day it is, anything that you feel you want to share, just put it in the chat, as long as it is decent, of course. And then, the session is recorded. So everybody who's a member of the PMO leader will have access to the recording, and who's not a member, membership is free. So feel free to go ahead and register so you can access the recording and take it in your own time if you can't stay throughout the whole discussion, or if you can just make the live event. But enough with the opening items. Ross and Adrian, welcome once again. And if you'd like to go over just a few things about yourself, I won't want to take that away from you.
Okay, shall I kick off, Adrian? Okay, so as Ilinka said, I'm based here in the UK. Now, the interesting thing is that I'm an Australian who now lives in the UK, whereas Adrian is British, but he lives in Australia. And he loves Australia and I love the UK. So work that one out. We pass in the air many times. My background has always been in the P3 space. And in the consultancy area. So I've been a consultant now. Well, you can tell from the grey hair, I've been a consultant for, I don't know, it must be 30 odd years now. And the last 20 of those years has been predominantly working in the governance space. And the reason that's quite useful from a consultancy perspective is, of course, that you're working in various organizations. So you get to see the same issues in so many different types of organizations. And we've drawn on that in the book itself. But on that point, most of my work, by the way, has been in Australia, a lot of work in the public sector. Some work here in the UK, some work in the Middle East, and work in the USA as well. And on that point, I'll hand over to Adrian so he can tell you a little bit about himself.
Thank you, Ross, and thank you, Ilinka, and thank you, the PMO leader, for this opportunity. As Ilinka said, I'm joining you from Brisbane, Australia, probably a bit hotter than where some of you are located at the moment. As Ross said, I share some of the sort of similar sort of background, 30 plus years, largely in professional services. I've been fortunate enough to work in different countries around the world. And in the last sort of 15 or so years, I've really focused in on how to help organizations with their projects, programs, and portfolios. That's across infrastructure, technology, transformation and for purpose programs. And what that sort of usually entails is either specific initiatives, whether it be programs or projects, ensuring that they're set up for success. So that might be during mobilisation of something that's significant and complex, or it might be an intervention where something's maybe not going as planned. Also work with organisations across their sort of capabilities as it relates to program, project, portfolio management and governance. So that might be building frameworks, setting up new functions such as PMOs. And then often the journey starts with me looking under the hood with some sort of assurance role, and maybe a health check or a maturity review of something. And then that leads to opportunities for improvement for different organisations. So that's kind of my sort of focus. And Ross and I were fortunate enough to work together over a number of years, and that's how the relationship sort of developed. So we worked together closely, I think, from about 2005 till Ross left in 2019.
2019, yeah.
And did some amazing things together.
Yeah, some of the most complex engagements I've ever been associated with have been because of Adrian. I don't know whether to thank him for that or or not, but they were certainly interesting, very interesting.
Well, hopefully you didn't leave the country because of that.
No, definitely not. No, I like cold and wet and overcast conditions.
Okay. Well, then you might want to visit Toronto, Canada too, occasionally. Thank you both for the introduction, and it's amazing to hear how many years of experience you have, and in a diverse palette of industries, and just coming together, putting all those thoughts together, and putting together this book, this and course that we will be talking about, and hopefully, this all for people that are kind of working with those current situations, and in the hopes that they would avoid those issues that you keep on seeing, or you kept on seeing throughout your experience. So thank you for being the leaders of such of an initiative. I think on behalf of all the PMPPs and all the other abbreviations within project management, I think we all appreciate that. And to this extent, I guess the first question to kick it off is how it all started. Was it the book? Was it the course?
Well, I started working in the governance space way back in the early 2000s, in the P3 governance space, that is. And as a result of some work I did after about 5 or 6 years of doing a lot of governance work, I decided to write a book, and which I did. It's about 15 years old now, which seems amazing to me, but it is. But I always felt that I had, because I then kept consulting for another 15 years, 10 years or whatever. And learning more and more and understanding the environment better and better. And I always felt that I had another book in me, but the thought of having to sit down and write a book didn't really appeal until I got a phone call. And that phone call was from the person who's now my business partner, Alberto Osman. And Alberto's in training, and he saw a big need in the markets he was operating in, which was the Middle East and North Africa. He saw a big need for governance training there, which has subsequently proved to be correct. So he was interested in me running a training course. And the more we talked about it, the more it became obvious that if we were going to have a good training course, it had to be based upon a good guide. So very quickly it became obvious that what was necessary was going to be a P3G guide, something that covered the whole project, program, portfolio governance, and integrated the three. Yeah, so you had that single line of sight from the top to the bottom and back up again. So I started down that journey of writing the guide. And after being at it for, I don't know, about 6 months, it was starting to become obvious to me that I'd been working in the same mindset for so long that I was almost in a rut and I couldn't get out of that rut. And at that point, Adrian and I started having a conversation, because Adrian had been doing a lot of work on governance, both with me when I was working with him, and then subsequent to that, Adrian was doing governance work as well. So we had a chat, and how about I'll let you take over from there, Adrian?
Yeah. Thanks, Ross. Yeah, it was it was interesting because I was aware Ross was writing the guide, and had invited me to be one of the reviewers and contributors in terms of contributing case studies. And so Ross circulated the first draft, I think it was, in mid-21. And that led to a lot of discussions around how it could be improved. And we quickly arrived at the position where the best solution going forward was for me to come on as a co-author. And at that point, we really set about actually putting some clear design principles to support the book in terms of driving what's in and what's out. Because in deciding these things, in terms of content, there's so much more we could have added. But we wanted to make sure that we developed a guide that was easy to engage with, was fit for purpose, and we can talk to some of those design principles, and also then obviously contributed towards Ross's objective in terms of developing a course. And the whole premise around this was, we'd seen time and time again that project, program, portfolio governance was one of the sources of common sources of failure for investments and initiatives. And some of the best practice that exists globally doesn't really do it justice in terms of the coverage it gives to this important subject. And so, that's what drove us to develop something. We're both sort of long-term career professionals, and personally, I wanted to leave a legacy from some of the work that I've done and impart some of that knowledge. But at the same time, it really helps me engage with my clients. They can understand some of these things a little bit easier. And I've found, having written the book or been co-author of the book now, that some clients now engage with the book first and then come and talk to me and say, we've got to a certain point. Now, can you come in and maybe help us with some of the more complex attributes? So that was the story. And so it was interesting. Ross and I then basically deconstructed the first version of Ross's book. There was some great material in there, but we reset it and then set on a path to try and then sort of turn it into something that was going to be that engaging sort of guide that was easy to engage with. It then took us the best part of a year to get it to actual publication. And it was interesting because I don't think we could have done it unless we had the prior relationship, because there were times that it tested both of us. Ross had semi-retired, and so was dedicated toward getting this across the line, whereas I was still in full-time employment. And so Ross was cracking the whip each week, and my Monday night and Ross's Monday morning was our sort of check-in each week in terms of progress. And Ross was saying, "Oh, come on, Adrian, you need to do more." And so my wife termed herself a book widow, because basically I was working sort of 5 days a week in my day job and then every weekend on the book. But no complaints. It was really worth it. And as I said, sometimes Ross and I had some differences of opinion in terms of content. Sometimes we had differences of opinion in terms of just getting on with each other. But that was all part of the journey.
I think that was part of the pressure, wasn't it? That trying to get the book out the door. My goodness! And the other thing that made it a real challenge is that we had about a dozen external reviewers. And these were people, you know, like people like Stephen Jenner, who's the world expert on benefits, and Rod Soden on program management, Martin Samfire, who knows an awful lot about governance. So we had some really key people who were reviewing the book. And these people, you know, we made it clear to them we didn't want them to pull punches. And so we were getting some really strong review comments back. And that meant going back to them and talking through it with them to fully understand what they were saying, because these people were experts in their particular fields. And we wanted to make sure that we didn't just get the governance bits right, but, you know, governance is just one part of the whole picture when you're talking about projects, programs, and portfolios. So that took a lot of effort, making sure we covered off on the review comments and went back to people when we had further comments. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that.
What was
Sorry,
did you have a? Yeah, I was just curious hearing about the whipping. I was just curious if you had a specific set of timelines in mind, or was it because of these reviewers that you were hoping to, you know, to make their time useful as well? Did you have a specific deadline for it?
Yeah, I might comment on that. Yeah,
sorry, go on.
As I remember it, Ross, the first deadline was to get the second review copy to reviewers over the Christmas holidays at the end of 21, to allow them some time to review it during that period. Yeah. So that was the first sort of crack of the whip, but it was really interesting, as Ross said. The reviewers didn't hold their punches, which was fantastic, and did challenge us on a number of things. And so we actually made quite material changes to the document, including downgrading one principle to a practice and introducing a new principle, which was a great insight for us. It was something that we took for granted, but it really needed articulation. And that's the value in the reviewers, in that objective view of the overall sort of content. As you know, even as Ross said, he got in a bit of a rut, and then together we were reinforcing certain things. But the one thing that we were conscious of is we needed to be very open to critical friend feedback.
Yeah,
and that was really well received.
You wanted to say something, Adrian, earlier, and I cut you off. Sorry. Was it on the same line?
Yes. Yeah, that's great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, just one other thing, Alinka. I'll dive in. I hope I'm not taking one of your future questions here, but one of the things Adrian touched on it was the approach that we took in writing the book and the design principles we used, and they were very much informed by the fact that both of us are consultants. And when you're a consultant and you go into an organization, especially when you've got the gray hairs like us, or the no hair like us, the client expects answers quite quickly. Yeah, they want solutions. They don't want theory. They don't want the philosophy of what you're talking about. They just want the answers. And it struck us that the same thing must happen when somebody's called into the boss's office and their superior says to them, we've got problems with the governance on such and such a program. Can you sort it out for me? And what we realized was there was nothing in the market that actually did that. There was nothing that says, this is what you need to do. This is how to go about doing it. And this is why. You have to have the why in there. And the reason you need the why is that if people want to tweak their governance arrangements, they have to understand the implications of those tweaks. And they can only understand that if they understand the why you're doing it in the way that you are. So we came at it from a very pragmatic perspective. But the second level was we didn't want to be prescriptive, because you just can't be prescriptive in the governance space. Every organization's different. So that was what drove us down that principles-based approach. And as you know, the guide is comprised of 10 principles, which makes up a large portion of the guide.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think that's a good point to add. And I also wanted to ask, go ahead, Adrian. I'll ask afterwards.
No, you go, Alinka.
I was curious about the. I also found interesting that you have those case studies at the end of the book to kind of explain, you know, some of the principles and the approaches to it. I was just curious if, you know, those case studies are from your own personal experience, or maybe experiences from some of the reviewers, or just trends that you see in different areas.
That was that. Yeah. And I think leading to that, in designing a book, as Ross said, you know, very principles based, so that it's not prescriptive. It can be used in a number of different environments, deliberately different to a methodology. And so that's what we've received really good feedback around, the fact that it is principles based, and then supporting that with a number of practices in terms of how to implement some of these arrangements, and then how to ensure that they're sustainable, and a number of other ways in which organizations can ensure they're set up for success. But as you say, Alinka, then there's some case studies. And that's something that we spent quite some time in determining what the case studies might be. And as Ross said, they're a bit of a hybrid between our own experience, feedback from reviewers, and a pure demonstration of some of the principles. And so this is the case studies themselves are set up to demonstrate each of the principles. And so people can actually see then a line of sight. Once they've engaged with the principles, they understand maybe how to put it into practice. An interesting discussion point for us, though, was that we did consider a number of other case studies which maybe demonstrated some of the principles, but in any implementation of P3G arrangements, there's sometimes a need to do workarounds or trade-offs, because you need to tailor it to the particular organization's environment, particular levels of maturity, appetite for change. And so we debated long and hard, Ross and myself, in terms of should we have some case studies that demonstrated some of those trade-offs. And we decided not, because it was a case of we didn't want to create an overly long guide. Part about one of our design principles is it needs to be engaging and easy to engage with. But also, we wanted people to be led upon a path where they could understand the principles, and then over time, then start looking at some of those trade-offs. And so that was something that was an interesting discussion point for Ross and I. But the case studies themselves are largely based from our own experience, but with some inputs from others. And some of those were engagements that we both wear scars from. So it was it's something that we've invested time in with clients, and some of those are then where clients have actually reaped the rewards or benefits from embarking or embracing new arrangements.
Yeah, it's interesting there, Adrian. You mentioned that quite often there's a need for trade-offs when you're working in the governance space. And I explain it on the course as governance, at the core of governance is accountability. And accountability itself is about ownership, and ownership is about turf. It's about what people in the organization consider to be what they own. So as soon as you're dealing in governance, you're talking about people's little kingdoms within an organization. And so you can often bump into that problem. And sometimes the only way you're going to be able to help the organization forward is to just accept that a particular area you're not going to be able to implement. You're going to have to do a bit of a workaround on it. And as I always say, what you need to be clear of is you hold the line as long as you can on governance, to stick to the principles as closely as you can. But if you're going to move away from them, be clear as to why you're moving away from them, and be clear that that is indeed what you've done.
Yeah.
Document the fact that you've done that.
So how did you once the guide was ready and it was all dissected by the reviewers, and to both of your points, I look at it and it is, even if my personal professional side of the business is not that much involved into governance, I still find it an easy to understand read, which I think is key. I'm sure for people who are more and more in the business, it's even more useful. So I think that's amazing. Also, the case studies really help in understanding everything else that is before them. That's why I was curious. That's why my eyes went straight to the case studies. I'm usually a very example based. So once the guide was put together, how did you decide to launch it in conjunction with what's coming next? Because this is more of an introduction, right, for people working in the governance space, where they would have the general idea, and then they would probably follow up with you or for more in-depth information.
Well, in terms of the guide, I would like to think that anybody who needs to put in place the governance arrangements for a project, a program, or an entire portfolio should be able to read that guide, understand the logic behind it, understand the principles, and be able to develop such a framework. And we've got examples of the framework in appendices. We made sure the appendices are full of examples of enterprise governance arrangements, program governance arrangements, project governance arrangements, and so forth. So, I think basically with that guide, anyone reading that guide gets all of my knowledge and Adrian's knowledge around governance. What they don't get, of course, is our experience. And you can't put all your experience into a book. So they get the knowledge, but they don't get the experience. And sometimes the knowledge is sufficient. Sometimes it may not be sufficient.
Okay. Do they reach out to you in follow-up after reading the book, the guide?
Yeah, the nice thing is the feedback we've got from the guide, I don't think we've got anything less than 4 stars on the feedback for the guide. It's just been really well received. There's no negativity around it, which is just great. And so people are really happy that it is helping them. And every now and then you get a little snippet coming back saying, I see something on LinkedIn saying, really suggest you get this guide. I just used one of the appendices and it saved me about a week's work. And, that's really nice when you hear that sort of thing.
Yeah, and similar sort of story, Alinka. In my work, I often engage with a range of different sort of client organizations and partners, and I'm constantly surprised to hear, oh, I've got your book, it's well thumbed, and we're using it on a particular engagement or initiative, which is always really pleasing to see. And then they typically come back to people like Ross and myself, where maybe the level of complexity is at a certain level that maybe challenges their implementation of the guide, or they actually need that experience that Ross articulated to put in front of their senior management, their executives, almost to convince them about the change and provide not only credibility, but some war stories and some case studies of success or failure in implementation of governance arrangements. And so often, it's a case of, the organizations I work with maybe have the knowledge, but they don't have that credibility and experience to convince their own organization about what this means. And Ross and I can paint a picture of what that means in terms of a change journey, what that means in terms of impacts across the organization. And often we're called in, and Ross and I over the years got particularly frustrated about some of this. We're often called in to set up maybe a governance framework, and we'll invest a lot of time getting to know the organization, a lot of time in terms of tailoring governance arrangements fit for purpose for their organization, engaging heavily. And then the organization says, thanks very much, we've got the framework, we'll go ahead from here. but the journey doesn't stop there. The change management journey can be quite significant, and as Ross said, it impacts on people's turf. It impacts on the organisation in so many different ways that you need to have that insight, particularly if it's a significant transformation, to ensure that it is set up for success and it is sustainable. And so that's where Ross and I often get called back in, is to actually ensure that it's put into practice. And the other thing that's, I work a lot with organisations, is you can put in place arrangements, structures, terms of reference, role statements, decision processes, delegated authorities, all of those good things. And they may be fantastic, but there's a human aspect to this. How is it actually put into practice? And so the book covers some of the behaviours and practices that you'd expect to see, but often it's then engaging with sponsors, engaging with senior management, engaging with members of governance groups to actually reinforce what are the appropriate behaviours to ensure they get value and optimal governance outcomes. And that's a lot of what I do now in terms of that mentoring and ensuring that these things are set up for success and they do get the delta from implementing some of these new arrangements.
Do you see a trend, because you both work with many countries? I'm assuming in your day-to-day operations, do you see a trend or some areas in the world which are more receptive to this kind of governance and some that are less?
What I've seen, it's not just governance. It's broader than that. So, for instance, the UK is very focused on what was the old Axelos suite, management of portfolios and Prince 2 and MSP. So it has headed down that route largely, and so they tend to look at something like P3G as being in that same framework. But then we get other parts of the world, and they're very much the PMI approach, PMBOK and things like that. So the Middle East, USA, of course, head down that PMBOK approach. The interesting thing we found here is that we've got a fantastic reception for the guide here in the UK and in Australia, which follows the UK approach to best practice methodologies. But I've been invited to quite a few PMI events now to talk about governance. And the PMI are taking a much broader approach to best practice now. And so I was out in Riyadh for their Global Project Management Forum. I've spoken to the UAE, and there was another one just recently in South America, actually. So there's different areas of the world follow different methodologies in general, but P3G seems to work across both methodologies, which is very pleasing from our perspective. Well, not seems to work across. We knew it would be consistent because there's nothing in there that's controversial. Nobody can look at any principle and say, well, I don't agree with that, because they're just logical. So we knew we wouldn't be in conflict with any methodologies, but that doesn't always mean that people that follow certain methodologies will take it on board. But we found that they have. So it's very, very strong, for instance, in the Middle East, getting stronger and stronger, as I mentioned to you before the webinar started, Ilinka.
That's interesting. I mean, it could also mean that there's not really too much on governance out there.
There isn't. There's books on governance.
If everybody accepts it.
Yeah, well, there's books on governance, but they tend to be quite theoretical. So you pick it up thinking, I've got a governance problem, and you read the book, and it tells you some really interesting things, but it doesn't tell you how to solve your governance problem. And as I said earlier, that's what Adrian and I were setting out to do. Have a guide that is actually practical enough that people can pick it up and follow it to see what they would need to do to resolve a governance issue in their organization. And one of the things we covered, there's sections in the guide, which run through so many of the issues that we've come across over the years the various governance issues, what to look out for, what you'll see, how to identify if you've got a governance problem. So for anybody listening, how do you know if you've got a governance problem with one of your projects or programs? Go to the last 3 minutes of meetings and see how many proxies you've got. The more proxies, in other words, delegates attending instead of the member, the more of those that you've got, the less effective the governance is, because they don't consider it worth their while to sit in that meeting. So it's just, little leading indicators like that to indicate whether or not you've got governance issues.
They shouldn't allow delegates to the meetings.
Probably not.
Whoever came up with that idea is not a good one.
It's a fact of life. Fact of life, I think.
But that's amazing. And was this when you two started putting together the guides together? Did you have in mind that you wanted it to become this final tool, this all-in-one type of tool, or did that come along the journey with the help of the reviewers too? Because I'm assuming that the reviewers were also educated in terms of what the expectations are once the guide is over, so that they know what to dissect more on.
Yeah, very, very much so. And we wanted it to be a complete guide. And that's why, as Adrian said, one of the feedback from one of our reviewers was, you're missing a principle. And we, after we discussed this with him at length, we realized he was right. He was spot on. And so there's a principle in there that's attributable to one of our reviewers, which is just fantastic. That's what you want from reviewers.
Yeah, and it's in terms of that concept of being a complete package. I think Ross and I, having sort of designed and implemented these arrangements across a number of different environments, it's almost the approach that we would take in terms of assessing what's fit for purpose that's currently in play, and then what are the gaps and deficiencies. So that it's almost our check and balance. So often when I work with clients, I put up the 10 principles as the starting point and look at what they've got in place at the moment, and then look at those gaps and deficiencies. And it's a quick ready reckoner in terms of what are the opportunities for improvement. Now, that's not to say that every principle needs to be in play all the time. You may have a particular focus at the project level or the portfolio level. And this was an interesting discussion I had with somebody the other day. They said, why aren't all the principles applicable to everything? And I said, well, that's not really what the guide's aimed toward. It picks out what are the core components that are applicable at the project level, program level, portfolio level, and really then sets out to define what good looks like, and then how you might implement that with some maybe trade-offs. And so that was the whole concept. Is it exhaustive? There was obviously more we could put in, but is it a great starting point and a great guide for people to engage with and use on a day-to-day basis to design, implement, health check their own governance arrangements? Absolutely. And I use it myself in terms of those design principles. It's those principles are gold, I think, for anybody operating in this space.
How would you advise one to figure out which are the critical principles to apply depending on their case?
Oh, they're all critical depending
or
upon
they're
the
all
area
critical
that you're looking at. So, there are some that are applicable only to projects and others that are applicable only to portfolios. So it's not as if there's any one principle that's more important than another. In some respect, they're integrated as well, in that there will be some principles that might have a knock-on effect on other principles and so forth. So for instance, just the treating business as usual and change differently, that can impact on other aspects, so like single point of accountability and things like that. So you can't pick one principle and say it's more important than another. It just depends on the circumstances, which principles you need to focus on.
Yeah, and I think that's very true, Ross. And it obviously depends upon the particular organizational environment, their particular issues, and also what they see as the key problems. You know, we may look at what they're doing and assess that they maybe have a suite of problems. Then they need to actually determine, working with people like ourselves or their own teams, as to how you prioritize that, because it's often not a big bang. You progressively work through some of these, because some of it does impact on turf, as Ross has said, but also some of it is actually building knowledge and capability in terms of what good looks like, and embracing those concepts. And one of the most pleasing things that I find is when I work with organizations and they start repeating back to me the principles, they start repeating back to me some of the same language I would use. And I at that point, I go, my job's 90% done here, which is fantastic.
You know, they read the guide.
Well, they've embraced
They have the terminology.
Yeah, they've embraced the concepts as well, and they understand not only the content, but they understand why, and that's what Ross had said before, why they're doing this and what benefits that they accrue from the why. So I think that's really pleasing. It's not just a case of following the guide, it's actually they see that the benefits, and at that point, you know, you can kind of start moving away, and they take ownership themselves, which is, you know, I often talk about that people like Ross and I need to work ourselves out of a job. You know, at the end of the day, if the client organization is able to take it on, move forward, and kind of, we're almost seen as getting in the way because they've got that momentum, they've got that knowledge, they've got the know-how. That's a great result.
Okay, well, that's amazing. And hi, Ben, and thank you for your comment. So what comes after the guide, Ross? There's training that is happening, right? There's always also some training. I'm thinking for people who want to explore more of it.
Well, that's right. So we've been running training courses now for just over a year, and initially, you know, you're working so hard to make sure that you had enough people on the course. And now we're fast approaching the point where we have to push people back into later courses, which is great news. But the other thing that's happening is that we have a process for accrediting other training organizations. So organizations that already do training in the project, program, and portfolio space, if they go through the course and then go through another step that we administer and pass that, they can become an accredited training organization for P3G. And that whole part of the business is run through P3G QA, QA being the qualification authority. And so we've got accredited training organizations now in the Middle East, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, a couple here in the UK. There's somewhere else. I'm sure there's somewhere else, but I can never remember the last place. But we're getting there. The word is gradually spreading, and what we're finding is their courses are filling up now too, because they've only been going a matter of months, and their courses are starting to fill up. So yes, there's training, and with anything like this, you know, this is where organizations like yours, Alinka, are just gold dust for us, because you can write the best book in the world, but unless it's promoted, it can just sink without trace, and nobody knows anything about it. And so that's where myself, and particularly Alberto, I think Alberto's listening in here, Alberto Osman, who runs P3G QA, does a huge amount of work in promoting the book and getting the knowledge out there about the book. And that's important. You know, if you feel you've got a good product, you've got to get it to the market, and it takes a lot of effort to do that. So we spend a lot of time doing that, and people like you just make it, you know, so much easier for us.
I think you know, your approach with finding training institutions, that will definitely fast pace, just accelerate the spread and the capabilities. And happy to hear that their seats are getting filled up.
But even
Also
though I
happy to
say
hear that Canadians are doing some.
they are. Okazi is the name of the Canadian company.
Okay.
And I was just about to say something else, which was really important, and it's gone completely out of my mind now. So never mind. Obviously, it wasn't that important.
How is the training? I guess how is the training? I'm assuming the training is in conjunction with the guide. Is it
Oh, yeah.
more of a discussion about actual situations?
No. So yes and yes is the answer. So the training follows the guide and covers everything. Everything that is in the guide is covered in the training, and then more. It's the training that gives you the benefit of my experience. So that's packed into the training as well, and lots and lots of case studies as we go through the training. Just examples that people recognize, simple examples. And you say, you will have seen this situation. And they do, people have seen this many, many times. And some of the things that I can show in case studies, people have always realized that there's been an issue around it, but they haven't been able to put their finger on what that issue was. So it just clarifies things for people as well. So to fit all that in, the courses that Alberto and I run go for nearly 3 days with an exam.
That's a lot of information, yeah.
So you're getting a lot of information in 3 days, a lot of case studies, trial exam questions, and so forth.
Okay, because at the end you would take an exam and you would get a certification for it. Okay.
Yes,
you as an individual or the organization?
No, an individual. It's always individual. So the individual, if they choose to consider an exam, we always encourage it. And one of the ways in which we encourage it is that they can buy the exam as part of the package. As soon as the course finishes, they can sit the exam there and then. And if they don't pass it, they get another sit. So it's effectively a free exam at the end of the course. And if they don't pass, they can then do some more study and sit the exam again. We found that that means that 95% of people on the courses are now doing the exam because they know they'll get through it. If they put the work in, they'll get through it. Multiple choice questions, 50 multiple choice questions. And I don't pretend it's easy, but then, nothing in life worth having is easy.
Do you see organizations starting to ask their employees to go through these courses? Like the project management courses, where some organizations actually ask for the certifications. Do you see that they're starting to move in that direction?
We're getting to that point. So, for instance, in the Middle East, you know these mega giga projects that they have in the Middle East. We had half a dozen people from a PMO associated with one of those giga projects come onto the course. There's their leader and five of his people. So we're reaching that point, and we've got other things in the pipeline that we hope will encourage that even further. It's still like the book has only been out now for 18 months, just over 18 months. So it's still about the book getting a profile in the marketplace. And we've already seen it starting to generate its own publicity without our help, people just word of mouth. And I think as it becomes more and more known, it will become a snowballing effect. So we're very, very positive about the future for the guide.
Yeah, no, it's definitely still a junior, but it's a strong junior. You probably covered a lot in these 18 months.
Oh yeah, it's been quite a journey. It's quite exciting though. Everything comes back to the fact and Adrian will nod his head here, everything comes back to the fact that the product is good. Yeah, we put a lot of effort into making sure the product is good. And, you know, I feel so good that what I've put out there, I'm 100% behind. I'm not sitting there thinking, oh God, I wish we'd put a little bit more effort into this area, or a bit more into that effort, or a bit more effort into that area. From my perspective, it's a complete package, which is great. Doesn't mean it can't be improved at some point in the future, but it's a complete package.
That was my next question. What is the future looking like?
Yeah,
Go ahead,
so
Adrian,
I think it was really interesting when we launched it. We launched it, and I happened to be in London the middle of 22, and so we had a launch, and the publishers, the TSO, kindly hosted a fantastic luncheon, and we had some of the reviewers and some other sort of notable names in the profession to join us, and it was interesting getting some of the feedback from some of those eminent professionals, in that they said, yeah, loved the guide, and then some of the things that they suggested could be additions we'd actually thought about and thought long and hard about. You know, do we have more on PMO? Do we have more case studies? You know, and some of those things are valid suggestions, but at the point that it was released, I think it still has the content that I think has appeal. As I said, one of our design principles was to ensure that it was easy to engage with. So we didn't want to create a tome. If you look at the guide itself, half of it is appendices. So really the content of the principles, the practices, the case studies is not hard to engage with, as I think you found, Alinka. And so that was really key for us. And there are other sort of guides and sort of collateral that are complementary to this. And so some of the best practice suite, in terms of whether it be PMI, Axelos, you know, we're obviously highly familiar with those. And what we've developed here is complementary. We didn't want to overlap what was already covered in some of those other guides, because they sit in their own right and have good coverage, say, from management of portfolios or P3O. And so that was, we were very conscious of that, to make sure that, you know, the content was something that Ross and I could stand by over the years, but didn't necessarily second guess anything else that was already out there. So that was important to us, and I think that's why it's been embraced by a large number of people, whether they're from the sort of PMI sort of side of the house, or Axelos, or PeopleCert as it is now, because it doesn't conflict, it's complementary.
And then we have, I guess, in a similar note, a question from Ben: if you are planning to renew or review or renew the guide in a few years' time. So
we're still getting over the trauma of the first production, I think, Alinka.
Ross said to me,
maybe Adrian needs a full-time job about the book to cover the book.
Ross scared me initially, because once he'd released the course, he said, Adrian, you know, in 5 years we're going to have to revisit this. I said, Ross, let's just celebrate where it's at now for the moment.
Well, depending on how the evolution of governance will take place in the next few years, I guess, you know, sometimes it makes sense to update depending on what other principles come out there and who else says what.
Yep.
So on and so forth. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. And neither of us particularly want to talk about the next edition, because to do it right, we know how much work there will be in it.
Yeah. And I think if you do something like that, you have to do what we did when we started our journey together, is deconstruct what's already there. Not necessarily start with a fresh piece of paper, fresh blank sheet, but certainly just don't look to augment what's there. As you said, Alinka, things change. And so we need to make sure that you know, whatever we do invest time in is actually fit for purpose, and not just kind of a polishing something that's already there.
Yeah. And surely the audience will probably let you know.
That's right. Yes.
as soon as they want to say anything else. They will probably reach out. Your students, your who would you say are the main audience of the book and the training courses?
PMOs, project managers, they're the two big areas that we get. We're starting to find a lot of portfolio office managers starting to get interested now. Because quite often the people at the portfolio office level are following that line of sight all the way down through the portfolio, through the programs and into the projects and so forth. So they're starting to get interested, more and more interested. So it's, yeah, but PMOs, you know, where P could be any of the three Ps, they're a big audience for us. Because you know, if you look at something like P3O or the PMO competency framework, governance is talked about in there, but there isn't the detail that says, and this is what you need to look for. So, you know, it's a case of finding something else that tells you that, and this is what we produce.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I'm seeing also, Ross, is people that sort of offer some of the same services as us in terms of introducing new capabilities, ways of working. They're embracing this as part of their arsenal or suite of knowledge, because these are now recognized as the global sort of best practice principles for P3G. So I think that, you know, in terms of ensuring that they have that as part of their toolkit, I think we're seeing some of that, which is fantastic.
Yeah, and that's going to happen more and more too, I'd say.
Yeah.
Okay, well, in that case, we will reserve a spot for in a few years' time when the sequel, apparently Ben is asking for. So for when the sequel is ready.
We've penciled in Brad Pitt for the lead role.
We're coming close to the top of the hour. So is there anything else that you wanted to put out there? Any events, how can people reach out if they want more information? They go to the website, LinkedIn.
Something that people might be interested in is there is a webinar on Thursday midday London time, and the webinar is project governance for your project in 10 easy to understand steps. So it's just a step-by-step approach for setting up a governance structure for a project. So if people are interested in that, we could put a note on the chat, if I can just find where I've got it here.
I think Alberto already sent the link.
Alberto's put it up, Ross.
Yeah, thank you, Alberto.
Quick, isn't he? Look at that.
Yeah,
Alberto.
Brilliant.
I keep forgetting to scroll down.
So in answer to your question, Alinka, happy for people to reach out to me through LinkedIn. Always happy to chat about governance. I'm a keynote speaker next month at the PMI conference in New Zealand. So if anybody's over at that point, please come and join. And that would be, and I'd love to meet you. But please reach out either through LinkedIn or my website, which is outcomeadvisory.com. And that's a relatively new business since I sort of left full-time work and stepped into a kind of a more manageable lifestyle. And so, yeah, I'm regularly now publishing articles through that site. So please feel free to reach out to me.
That's amazing. Thank you, Adrian. And then Ross, anything from you? I see Alberto is sharing the links, the LinkedIn profiles and everything.
No, I would recommend anyone who's interested in the governance space, have a look at this website, just at the webinar on Thursday. Just register for it. It's free. And it means that you can then download it after the event because it'll be recorded. And you might find it interesting. You might find it helpful.
Thank you. I will.
I will see people at various conferences around the globe.
Okay. And I think we also have, let's see. Yeah, no, I think we shared the link, the book link as well. And Alberto shared the events for the next training sessions for whoever wants to undergo a 3-day training with Ross and Alberto.
Excellent.
Okay, so I think we're all set. We hope to see a lot more about governance, and follow you and Adrian around the world to see your progress, and eventually a sequel whenever the time comes, whenever you're ready. But in the meantime, we really appreciate the PMO leader for both of you for making the time to talk to us today and to share your insights and talk about the book. And
really
we will hope to be in touch.
Yeah, thank you, Alinka. Thank you, the PMO leader. And I think, as you said earlier, I think this is the first time there'd been 3 different continents involved in one of these, which I think is a great step forward for yourselves.
Well, I appreciate both of you for squeezing in different times, maybe appropriate or inappropriate times of the day. I think I'm the most comfortable right now.
I got my offerings.
Very late, very early.
Yes, I'm off to have breakfast now. So
well, in that case, who knows? Our audience probably also all around the world. So best probably to say good evening, good morning, good afternoon to everybody. And yeah, we have our next episode is end of February. We'll get more info on that on LinkedIn. In the meantime, just leaving you with a big thank you to Ross and Adrian for today, and be on the lookout for the recording, everybody. And then you can feel free to share it with others. And thank you, everybody who attended today live.
Thank you so much.
Until next time.
Everyone.
Bye, everybody.